Ryan was standing behind the counter like he had owned the place his entire life. The lunch crowd had just finished, and the dining room was half empty. 2 regular customers were still sipping coffee in the corner booth. Our waitress, Carla, froze mid-step when she heard him speak. My brother tapped the countertop and smiled like he was announcing good news. "Everyone should get used to it," he said casually. "I'll be running the restaurant now." The words didn't make sense at first. Because the restaurant wasn't his. It never had been. And the way my parents quietly stood beside him made something inside my chest go cold. "My name is Emma, and I'm 32 years old. Before I start telling you how everything unfolded, I want to say something quickly. If you value stories about family betrayal, hidden truths, and the quiet moments when justice finally catches up with people who thought they got away with everything, please consider subscribing to the channel. Only subscribe if you truly value the stories we share here and if you connect with them. What happened in my family still feels unreal sometimes. I realized my family had betrayed me in the middle of my own restaurant." Ryan leaned casually against the counter while our staff watched the scene unfold. He spoke like someone announcing a promotion. "Dad and I have been talking," he continued. "And it's time for a few changes around here." I looked at my father. "Dad?" He avoided my eyes. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Because the one thing my dad had never done in 30 years of running Carter's Grill was avoid a straight answer. But that afternoon, he suddenly looked like a man who didn't want to be part of the conversation. Ryan kept talking. "Emma's done a good job helping out," he said, smiling at me like he was being generous. Helping out. Those 2 words hit harder than anything else he said. Helping out. I had spent almost 15 years working inside that building. I knew every supplier. Every regular customer. Every broken cabinet hinge in the kitchen. I knew exactly how long the fryer took to reach temperature and which refrigerator door needed a little extra push to close properly. Helping out? I stared at him. "What exactly are you talking about?" Ryan shrugged like it was obvious. "Ownership." The word echoed in my head. Carla slowly walked into the kitchen, clearly sensing the tension. The 2 customers in the corner booth were now openly watching. And my mother still hadn't said a single word. "Ryan," I said carefully, "this isn't funny." He laughed. "I'm not joking." Then he said something that made the entire room go silent. "This restaurant belongs to me now." The way he said it wasn't angry. It was confident. Like someone announcing something that had already been decided. I turned to my father again. "Dad, what is he talking about?" My father rubbed his forehead. "Maybe we should talk about this later." That answer made everything worse. Because the moment he said that, Ryan smiled. And that smile told me something had already happened behind my back. Something serious. The rest of that afternoon felt like a fog. Ryan walked through the kitchen pointing at things like a manager doing an inspection. "Menu needs updating. We should repaint this wall. These booths are outdated." Every sentence made the staff more uncomfortable. Finally, after about 15 minutes, Ryan grabbed his jacket. "I've got a meeting in Portland," he said casually. Then he looked at me. "We'll talk tonight." And just like that, he walked out. The front door bell jingled softly as it closed behind him. The restaurant was quiet for a few seconds. Then Carla stepped out of the kitchen. "Emma, what was that?" I forced a smile. "Nothing. Just family stuff." But inside, my mind was racing. Because something about Ryan's confidence didn't feel like bluffing. He wasn't trying to provoke me. He genuinely believed what he had just said. And that meant someone had told him the restaurant was his. After we closed that night, I stayed behind in the office. My parents had already gone home. Which wasn't normal. Usually my dad stayed late to review the daily sales report. But tonight he left early. That bothered me more than anything Ryan had said. I sat down at the old desk in the office and opened the bottom drawer where we kept important documents. Insurance papers. Vendor contracts. Tax files. The restaurant had been operating for almost 30 years, and the filing system wasn't exactly modern. Still, everything important was there somewhere. I started flipping through folders slowly. My mind kept replaying Ryan's words. This restaurant belongs to me now. That sentence only made sense if something had legally changed. Ownership. Contracts. Business registration. Eventually, I found a thin folder labeled Business Registration. Inside were several official documents from the state of Oregon. I pulled out the most recent one. And that's when my heart skipped. Because the top of the page read, Carter's Grill LLC. Registered owner, Emma Carter. I stared at the page for several seconds. Then I read it again. Registered owner, Emma Carter. My name. Not Ryan's. Not my parents'. Mine. The document was dated 2 years earlier. Right around the time my dad had taken me to meet that business attorney. Suddenly the memory of that meeting came rushing back. The paperwork. The signatures. The lawyer explaining that we were restructuring ownership. At the time, I hadn't fully understood the legal language. I had assumed my dad was simply protecting the business from taxes or liability. But the document in my hands was very clear. The registered owner of Carter's Grill was me. Which meant Ryan's announcement earlier that day wasn't just wrong. It was legally impossible. Unless something else had changed that I didn't know about. I searched the folder again. There were a few other documents. Tax filings. Renewal forms. A lease agreement for the building itself, which was still under my parents' name. But the business license was crystal clear. I owned the restaurant. At least on paper. So why was Ryan so confident? Why had my parents stood there silently while he claimed ownership? I sat back in the chair and tried to think logically. There were only a few possibilities. Either Ryan didn't know the legal structure of the business. Or he believed something had changed recently. Which meant someone might have tried to change the ownership behind my back. The idea sounded paranoid at first. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Ryan had been spending a lot of time at the restaurant lately. He had been talking about changes. He had been meeting with Dad privately several times over the past few months. And now he was walking around like the place belonged to him. I reached for my phone and opened the Oregon Business Registry website. It took about 30 seconds to search for Carter's Grill LLC. The page loaded slowly. Then the registration details appeared on the screen. Owner, Emma Carter. Registered manager, Emma Carter. Business status, active. No recent ownership changes. Which meant legally, nothing had changed. Ryan's claim had no legal foundation. At least not according to the state records. But that still didn't explain my parents' silence. Because if they knew the restaurant was legally in my name, why hadn't they corrected him? Why had they just stood there? The answer that started forming in my mind made my chest tighten. Maybe they thought Ryan deserved the restaurant. Even if it legally belonged to me. That possibility hurt more than anything else. Because it meant the betrayal wasn't just coming from my brother. It was coming from my entire family. And if they had already decided Ryan should run the place, they might try to pressure me into giving it to him. But the document sitting on the desk told a very different story. Legally, Carter's Grill was mine. Which meant if Ryan wanted to take control of it, he was going to have to do something far more complicated than making confident announcements in the dining room. And the next conversation we had was about to reveal exactly how far he was willing to go. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in the restaurant office for almost 2 hours staring at the document with my name printed at the top. Registered owner, Emma Carter. It should have been reassuring. But it wasn't. Because the more I thought about the way Ryan had spoken earlier that day, the more one thing became clear. He wasn't bluffing. Ryan had never been good at hiding uncertainty. If he was lying, there would have been sarcasm in his voice. Some kind of smug teasing. Instead, he had sounded calm. Certain. And that kind of certainty usually comes from someone who thinks they've already won. Around 9 that night, my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Ryan wants everyone to come to the house," she said. Her voice sounded tense. "For what?" "Dinner." That answer made me laugh quietly. "Mom, it's 9 o'clock. "Well, a discussion, then." There it was. The family meeting. Every family that avoids confrontation eventually has one of these. I locked the office, grabbed my jacket, and drove to my parents' house. They still lived in the same place Ryan and I grew up in. A 2-story house about 10 minutes from the restaurant. When I walked in, the atmosphere felt heavy. Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table. Dad stood near the sink. Mom hovered near the counter like she wasn't sure where to stand. Nobody smiled. Ryan gestured toward a chair. "Emma, sit down." That alone irritated me. The way he spoke sounded like he was already in charge. I sat anyway. "Okay," I said. "Let's talk." Ryan folded his hands on the table. "You embarrassed me today." I blinked. "You embarrassed yourself." His jaw tightened slightly. "You know what I mean." "No," I said calmly. "I don't." Ryan leaned forward. "I told the staff I was taking over the restaurant. And you made it awkward." I stared at him for a second before speaking. "Ryan, the restaurant isn't yours." The room went quiet. Ryan glanced at Dad. Then back at me. "That's what we're here to discuss." I looked at my father. "Dad?" He sighed. "Things have been complicated lately." That was not an answer. Ryan jumped in. "Look, Emma. You've done a good job running the place. No one is denying that." That sentence made my skin crawl. Because it sounded exactly like a performance review. "But the restaurant needs bigger thinking," he continued. "Expansion. Marketing. Branding." "Ryan," I said slowly, "you haven't worked a single shift there in 15 years. That's not the point." "It's exactly the point." He ignored that. "Dad and I have been discussing the future of the business." I turned to Dad again. "Is that true?" My father nodded reluctantly. "We've talked." "And?" Ryan answered instead. "And we think it makes sense for me to take over the next phase." I let out a slow breath. "And how exactly does that work?" Ryan smiled slightly. "Simple. I'll run the restaurant." "You already said that part." Mom finally spoke. "Emma, honey, your brother has some great ideas." I looked at her. "I'm sure he does." Then I looked back at Ryan. "But the restaurant is legally mine." That sentence changed the energy in the room. Ryan's smile faded slightly. Dad shifted his weight. Mom looked confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. I pulled the folded document from my bag and placed it on the table. The business license. Ryan glanced down at it. Dad avoided looking. Mom leaned closer. I tapped the line with my finger. Registered owner. Ryan read it silently. Then he leaned back in his chair. "That's just paperwork." I almost laughed. "Ryan, paperwork is literally how ownership works." He shook his head. "You're misunderstanding the situation." "No," I said calmly. "I think you are." Ryan's voice hardened. "The restaurant is a family business." "Yes." "And Dad built it." "Yes." "So technically it belongs to him." I looked at Dad again. "Does it?" My father finally spoke. Emma, when we restructured things a couple years ago, the lawyer recommended putting the business under your name for liability reasons. That confirmed what I had suspected. So legally, I own it. Yes, but... Ryan cut in. But that doesn't mean it was supposed to stay that way forever. I raised an eyebrow. According to who? Ryan leaned forward. According to the family. There it was. The logic of someone who believed feelings mattered more than contracts. I stayed calm. The state of Oregon doesn't care about family feelings. It cares about legal ownership. Ryan laughed once. Emma, don't be dramatic. I'm not. Dad rubbed his temples. Let's slow down. Ryan shook his head. No, we need to be honest. He pointed at me. You've been running the place, sure. But that doesn't mean you should control it forever. And why not? Because you're not thinking big enough. I stared at him. You think running a diner is small? No, he said quickly. I think you're small. That insult hung in the air. Mom immediately stepped in. Ryan, don't say things like that. But he continued. You're comfortable with the restaurant staying a small-town diner forever. I'm not. And what exactly are your plans? I asked. Ryan leaned back confidently. I've been talking to investors. That sentence made my stomach tighten. What investors? People in Portland. About what? Expanding Carter's Grill into a brand. I folded my arms. And where exactly do you fit into this plan? Ryan smiled again. I'd be the CEO. I actually laughed out loud. You're serious? Completely. And the fact that I legally own the business doesn't complicate that idea for you? Ryan shrugged. We can fix that. That sentence sent a cold feeling down my spine. How? Ryan looked at Dad again. And my father finally said the thing I had been afraid of hearing. We thought you might be willing to transfer ownership. The room went silent. I stared at him. You want me to give Ryan the restaurant? Dad hesitated. Not give. Share. Ryan immediately corrected him. Transfer. Mom looked uncomfortable. Emma, your brother just needs a chance. I felt something inside me harden. A chance? Ryan spread his hands. I can turn that place into something huge. And you need ownership to do that? Yes. I leaned back in my chair. So let me get this straight. Ryan waited. You want me to sign over the restaurant that I've spent 15 years building, so you can try another business experiment? Ryan frowned. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. It's exactly fair. The silence that followed was thick. Ryan finally spoke. You're being selfish. That word made me smile slightly. Selfish, for not giving you my business? It's the family business. It's my business. Ryan's patience finally snapped. You wouldn't even have that restaurant if it wasn't for Dad. That's true, I said calmly. But legally, it's still mine. Ryan stood up suddenly. You're really going to do this? Do what? Fight your own family over a diner? I met his eyes. You're the one trying to take it. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Ryan said something that changed everything. Fine, he said coldly. If you want to make this legal, we can make it legal. The way he said it made my chest tighten. Because that sentence suggested something very specific. Ryan already had a plan. And whatever that plan was, it probably involved lawyers. Ryan's words hung in the air long after he said them. If you want to make this legal, we can make it legal. Most people might have meant that as a bluff. Ryan didn't sound like he was bluffing. He sounded prepared. The strange part was that my parents didn't react with surprise. My mom looked nervous, but not shocked. My dad just stared down at the kitchen table. That silence bothered me more than Ryan's threat. Because it suggested something important. This conversation hadn't started tonight. It had been happening behind my back for a while. I stood up slowly. Okay, I said. Ryan frowned. Okay, what? If you want to make things legal, go ahead. Ryan looked briefly confused. I grabbed my bag. Because from what I've seen so far, the law is pretty clear about who owns Carter's Grill. Ryan smirked. Not for long. I walked toward the door. My mom called after me. Emma, honey, don't leave like this. I turned back. Then maybe next time don't plan to take my business without telling me. My father looked up. We're just trying to think about the future. No, I said quietly. You're trying to hand my work to Ryan. No one argued. That told me everything I needed to know. I left the house and drove home with a strange mixture of anger and clarity. For the first time since Ryan made that announcement in the restaurant, I realized something important. This situation wasn't emotional anymore. It was legal. And the moment things become legal, preparation matters more than family loyalty. When I got home, I opened my laptop and started researching. I looked up everything related to Carter's Grill. Business registration. Tax filings. Operating agreements. I even pulled up the original LLC documents from the state database. The more I read, the more something became clear. The ownership structure was very simple. Carter's Grill LLC had one registered owner. Me. There were no partners. No shared ownership clauses. No management board. Nothing complicated. Which meant something very important. No one could legally transfer ownership of the business without my signature. Not my father. Not my brother. No one. That realization should have made me feel relaxed. Instead, it made me uneasy. Because Ryan had sounded so confident. Confident people usually think they have leverage. So the question became simple. What leverage did Ryan think he had? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning I arrived at the restaurant around 6:30. The breakfast rush usually started around 7. Carla was already there brewing coffee. Morning, she said carefully. I could tell she wanted to ask about yesterday. But she didn't. Morning, I replied. The first hour passed normally. Regulars came in. Orders went out. The grill sizzled. For a little while, things felt normal. Then around 9:30, Ryan walked in. He wasn't alone. 2 men in suits followed him. They looked like lawyers. Ryan walked straight to the counter. Morning, he said casually. Carla froze. I stepped out of the kitchen. What's this? Ryan smiled. These guys just want to review some business documents. One of the men stepped forward. Good morning. I'm Daniel Hughes. He handed me a business card. The other man did the same. Michael Trent. Both cards said the same thing underneath their names. Commercial real estate attorney. That immediately raised a red flag. What exactly are you reviewing? I asked. Ryan answered before the lawyers could. The sale. My heart skipped. What sale? Ryan gestured toward the dining room. This one. I stared at him. You're selling the restaurant? He laughed. Not selling it. Then he pointed out the front windows toward the parking lot. Selling the property. My stomach dropped. Because suddenly everything made sense. The building. The land. The actual property Carter's Grill sat on. That had never been transferred into the LLC. My parents still owned it. Ryan continued, speaking like he was explaining something obvious. Dad owns the land, he said. He's been talking with a developer in Portland. I felt cold all over. A developer. Ryan nodded. Someone who wants to buy the property. For what? Apartment units. The two lawyers remained silent while Ryan explained. The offer is around $1.8 million. The number hit like a punch. Not because it sounded unbelievable, but because it suddenly explained everything. Ryan wasn't trying to run the restaurant. He was trying to eliminate it. I looked at my father, who had quietly walked in behind Ryan. You're selling the property? Dad sighed. It's a good offer. But the restaurant. Ryan cut me off. Is just a tenant. That sentence felt like a slap. Because legally, he wasn't entirely wrong. The business belonged to me. But the building belonged to my parents. Ryan smiled slightly. You see the problem now? I realized exactly what he meant. Even though I owned the restaurant business, I didn't own the building. If my parents sold the land, the new owners could terminate the lease. Which meant Carter's Grill could disappear overnight. Ryan folded his arms. The developer plans to start construction in 6 months. And you're okay with that? I asked. Dad looked tired. Emma, the restaurant has had a good run. A good run. 30 years reduced to 3 words. Ryan stepped closer. But here's the thing, he said quietly. The developer actually likes the restaurant concept. My eyes narrowed. What does that mean? Ryan smiled. They want to keep it. For the new apartment complex. My stomach twisted. But under new management. There it was. The real plan. Ryan wasn't taking my restaurant. He was replacing me. The developer would demolish the building, build apartments, then reopen a modernized version of Carter's Grill downstairs. And Ryan would run it. Ryan leaned slightly closer. They've already offered me the operating contract. I stared at him. And you think I'm just going to let that happen? Ryan shrugged. You don't really have a choice. I looked at the lawyers. Then back at Ryan. You're forgetting something. He raised an eyebrow. What? The restaurant name. Ryan blinked. What about it? The brand, I said calmly. Carter's Grill is registered under my LLC. Ryan's smile faded slightly. You can't open a new Carter's Grill without me. The lawyers exchanged a quick glance. Ryan looked annoyed. That's not a big problem. No? I asked. No. Ryan leaned forward slightly. Because once the building is sold. He paused. You won't have a restaurant anymore anyway. For a moment the room was silent except for the sizzling grill in the kitchen. Ryan had clearly thought this through. From his perspective, the situation was simple. My parents would sell the land. The restaurant would close. Then Ryan would reopen a new version with investors. My ownership of the original business wouldn't matter. At least. That's what he thought. But the more I thought about the plan, the more I realized something. Ryan had made a very big mistake. Because he had assumed I would panic. Instead, I started thinking strategically. And once I realized the one piece of leverage Ryan had overlooked, the entire situation suddenly shifted in my favor.